Several years ago, oh, maybe as many as 10, maybe a little more, I was working full time. I was divorced, and I was still doing quite a bit of creative writing. And here are some thoughts that I wrote early one morning. Some of them you may be able to relate to. Some of them, if you grew up in New York City, you can probably really relate to. And I guess maybe women more than men might be able to relate to this stuff, but I'm not sure. So let me know. Okay, so I hadn't had exactly a brilliant marriage. I was playing catch up from the start, and it took me 21 years to figure out that things weren't going to measurably improve. I was no longer one of the beautiful people. Who is after the age of 50? Well, okay, almost 60. But it is my firm belief that while good intentions may, as they say, pave the path to hell, they definitely have the effect of making that youthful exterior beauty pervade down to the interior person. So I may not be so much to look at, but inside, I've got what it takes in spades. I may have graying hair, a growing tendency towards a turkey neck, and my grandmother's upper arms, but I am so full of character there are hardly words to describe it. What man wants a woman with character? Well, I haven't found him yet, but I have faith he's out there. So, what did God have in mind? I mean, constructing women who love to talk and to go into detail, and constructing men whose eyes glaze over after 30 seconds of hearing her voice, unless she has visual aids like big breasts to help him with his concentration. And what, may I ask, do blind men do in these situations? But I'm getting off the subject. I was talking about me and my failed marriage. What would a school teacher say from these modern schools without failure? Oh yes, my marriage that had yet to realize its potential. And I was talking about my oodles of character. So, I am this quirky, imaginative, but highly principled woman. For instance, the thesaurus is my constant companion when I write. I delight in finding the exact words to describe what I'm talking about. Alternatively, I even know how to say that I relish rooting out the precise wording to relate that about which I am writing. OMG, as my daughters would say. Let's get on with it. How did I get into this state of my life? Living on my own, talking to my 2 dogs, relaxing in bed on a Saturday morning, laptop on my lap, capturing thoughts for my children. Some folks, when reflecting upon their lives, would prefer to remember someone else's past. Me? I prefer my own. I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood in the Bronx. It bordered and blended here and there with Italian neighborhoods and Irish neighborhoods. For instance, in the midst of our several blocks of families of Jewish immigrants, there was a Catholic all-boys school, All Hallows. One of the memories from my childhood and early adolescence, and something that I believe helped firmly entrench my low self-esteem as a woman, was having to survive the hordes of adolescent boys filling the street every morning and afternoon. I remember going to Dr. Cohn, the pediatrician, who was bald and rotund, wore thick eyeglasses, and had a mocking sneer. His office faced out onto Walton Avenue across from the park, Joyce Kilmer Park. I remember waiting for him in my underwear on the examining table and being able to see the streams of boys filling the streets through the downward slanted Venetian blinds. I sat in fear that if I could see them, they might notice me. What if some of them stopped and peered upward through the slats? It was terrifying. I had no place to hide. When I started 7th grade, I had to take the subway to and from school. Every morning, I had to push my way through all those boys coming from the subway station. And every afternoon, I struggled through the same 4 blocks of boys on my way home, while they pushed in the opposite direction to get to the subway and their own homes. It was horrible. Sometimes some of them said mean things or called attention to me. But boys don't even have to say anything to a 12-year-old girl to make her feel conspicuous. The fact that I had to repeatedly swim against this tide of boys, literally filling the sidewalk for several blocks so that I had to walk along the curb or hugging the apartment house walls, was enough to make me feel substandard. Why did I assume there was something wrong with me? But I did assume that, as do so many girls. I have read that there have been psychological studies in which people have been asked how they fared when chosen for teams in their childhood. A large number of respondents claimed they were always chosen last. The conclusion of the studies was that there is no way that something like 95% of people could have been chosen last. But that is how the large majority perceived it. So people tend to assume the worst about themselves. Even when I had matured into a very curvy and attractive teen, walking through those boys still had the same effect on me. I felt different, and different meant bad. I actually believed, even at that time, that different was good. However, my feelings and my beliefs have never, even to this day, been reconciled. If I were to wake up one morning, like they do in some movies, and discover that I was in my teens again, I would definitely do things differently the second time around. First of all, I would believe in myself. Even if that meant putting on a good act, I would act like I believed in myself so much that I would even fool myself into believing it. And I would make better choices, the kind that have happier long-term future outcomes. I would work harder to accomplish more at a younger age. And I would enjoy being me more. I have always enjoyed being different and the freedom of not having to be like everyone else. But there have been times that I have conformed. They were not the happiest times. My mother always used to quote, "To thine own self be true." It took till I was in my late 50s to look that one up. Shakespeare, as it turns out. But I never understood what it meant. Now I know. It means that it is not necessary for me to conform in order to experience some fleeting feeling of belonging to the fickle crowd. It means that I could have worn pretty white sandals way before my 20s instead of worrying people would be thinking I was not feminine enough to wear such things. It also means that if I was spending time with someone who did not make me feel good about myself, that I could stop and find someone who did make me feel good. If I had to do it over again, I would not give in to the temptation of fearing that people might not like me. I would like myself enough to be patient until I found people who liked me. And if someone didn't like me, I would give some consideration to the idea that maybe there was something wrong with them. After all, some of my most treasured relationships have been with people who were attracted to me because I was not like everyone else. Thoughts left to rumble around inside my head with no chance to see the light of day and human reason are often our downfall. Mine and yours. Take the white sandals, for instance. If someone else had told me they had this concern, I would have asked them, what makes you think that people would assume you had no right to wear such shoes? When asked that question out loud, the concern begins to sound a bit foolish and without foundation. I would have also asked, how feminine do you have to be to wear white sandals? I mean, how do you rate something like that? But I never got those thoughts out of my own head into some place where they could be heard by others. Had I done that, I might have realized what a waste of time and mental effort they represented. Have you heard the saying that the criminal always returns to the scene of the crime? So it's about 4:30 a.m., and whereas other people would have turned over and gone back to sleep, or at least if staying up would have cleaned the house or done something productive like that, here I am writing again. I had put the dogs out at around 12:30 a.m. after they had awakened me about 2 hours after bedtime. I had to get some sleep. Did I sleep from 12:30 to 4:30? Yes, but that included waking up at 2:30 a.m., even though the dogs were probably sound asleep and outside. When I wakened to a lot of barking at 4:30, I gave up and let them in. They were quite excited and energized by the nippy weather, acting as if they hadn't seen me or one another for days. After washing the mud off my arms and legs, I decided to stay up and fix a sandwich to eat at work today. Then I thought, why not fix one for now, too? People speculate and theorize about why we tend to become forgetful as we age. Scientists have put forth research findings, and pharmaceutical companies naturally have responded with pills. But crossword puzzles and exercise and brain foods notwithstanding, age and forgetfulness remain directly correlated. If we were dogs, it wouldn't matter. I could be just as thrilled and exuberant at seeing you after a 5-minute absence as after an absence of 5 years. Alternatively, if I growled every time you showed up, it could just be attributed to human nature. As a matter of fact, I once read about a tribe in the Amazon jungle or some similar environment in which people might be heard vigorously mourning a dead relative 20 years after their passing. To those tribal people, time had a different value and place in their lives than it does in ours. It was perfectly natural for them to be like that. That's how they were raised. That's what had been modeled for them. That's how they understood and dealt with life. So, in our fast food culture, it makes sense that everything is quick. Relationships are quick, even including marriage and to whose family one belongs. Mommy is married to husband A today. The children are A children. Next year, mommy gets divorced and marries husband B. Now the children are B children, blended with daddy's B children. When mommy divorces again and finds husband C, some of the original A children who became B children remain B children, while some go on to become C children, blended with original C's and maybe others that Daddy C had acquired along the way. When the new school asks for information on parents or the doctor asks about a family medical history, it can become confusing. When I was a child, we had to get up off our duffs, walk maybe 6 to 10 feet to change the channel by turning a dial on the TV. Channel surfing was non-existent back then. For one thing, in New York, the TV capital of the world, we only had about 7 channels. On VHS, we had channels 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11. On UHF, we had channel 13, which didn't always come in. I remember my TV day on Saturdays began with The Modern Farmer at about 6 a.m. Most stations signed off in the evening before midnight. Channel 9 showed the $1 Million Movie, however, all through the night. It was the same show all week long. That's why I watched La Strada on the Vatican list of top however many movies of all time. Not the reason I watched it. Maybe a dozen times or more as a child. I was fascinated by this movie I did not understand. I retain my childhood impressions of the movie. It was intense and depressing, and I have no idea why someone would make a movie about whatever it was about. Maybe it's from the same motivation as those who penned the classics. During one of my pregnancies, I decided to read some of the classics. I would have been better off had I chosen to learn to crochet and make baby blankets like I had during my first pregnancy. But I plowed ahead into Madame Bovary and The Mill on the Floss and others. Talk about depressing. These books chronicled one misery after another, and then they topped it off with the main characters dying or continuing to live in misery for the rest of their miserable, depressing lives. Well, those folks didn't have the 24-hour-a-day news to watch if they wanted to hear sad stories, so I guess they had to invent their own. Is the observant reader or listener wondering what happened at 4:30 a.m. and thinking I forgot where I was going with all this? Not to worry. Here's my point. I had gotten the meat and the mayo out of the refrigerator and then realized I had overlooked the mustard. So I took 2 steps back to the fridge to fetch it. I opened the door and for a moment couldn't remember what I was looking for. Age-related short-term memory loss? Hardly. In the time it took to walk to the fridge, my mind had filled with so many plans and concerns for the day and for my life that I was distracted away from thoughts of mustard. I was able to pull myself back into the moment, which is why I sit here typing and being careful not to drop crumbs into the keyboard. But the scientists and pharmaceutical companies, the speculators and theorists cannot relate my forgetfulness to some psychological aging process. My mind is affected by this mad rush in which we live. The more quickly we are able to do things, the more things we can fit in our time to do, and the more there is to remember. My mind became overfilled years ago, and the excess has had to spill out, like excess water over a dam. I have so many pressures and concerns that they hover over me every moment, like the crest of a wave, ready to engulf my thoughts. I've got mustard on my sandwich because I know how to keep hold of what's truly important through all the chaos and urgencies. But had you been looking on at that moment I opened the fridge and stood for a few seconds, baffled, you would have thought, oh my, she's losing it. Comes along with aging. But I am not your poor aged mother. I am a woman with mayo and mustard on her fingers and sesame seeds in her lap who has her mind filled with the increasingly increasing details of life. I am a thought wrangler. Sometimes those thoughts behave and are orderly and walk nicely in a line. But other times they pop up and down like fleas on a dog, or they gang up and become an unruly mob. There is no pill or special food for that. Once life has sped up, it's almost impossible to get it to slow back down. But I have speculated that forgetfulness might decrease if I still only had 7 TV channels and I had to get up and change the channel, and if TV stations still signed off before midnight. Not gonna happen. So as I get older and more forgetful, my children are hereby instructed to comment, "She's a woman with a lot on her mind." Think I'll take a 30-minute power nap before I have to get ready for work.